I want to introduce you to this great framework for integrating technology, and it's called the Triple E framework. And we'll have a very fast practice and spend some more time if you're interested in the breakout room after to talk about applying the framework to your instruction or using it if you're in administration. So there's a really great rubric that's available for it. So if you want to go ahead and scan that QR code, I hope you're familiar with Padlet, and go ahead and follow the instructions there. If you're on a phone or tablet, it's just a simple double tap or double click. If you also see in the right-hand corner, you will find as well a circle with a plus. If you are interested in typing in your name at the top, you can do that. And I just want to ask you this: what does good technology integration look like? So you can share a sentence, or if you want to try out I cannot draw, the AI feature that is built into Padlet these days, generative AI image generation, you can type in a prompt by selecting the all in the middle panel of Padlet, and you can put in a prompt for an image for what you think technology integration looks like when it is well done. So I'm gonna go ahead and have a look at what you are sharing. Okay, we see consistent, right? Learners get to practice their digital skills and build confidence because of the integration of technology is consistent. And so I'm going to vote a heart on that one, right? Goals before tools. And so Rachel here is, Rachel Riggs is active with the DRAW initiative, if you're familiar with that. And that is all about the consistency, giving students regular practice with a tool so that it becomes familiar to them, and then they can apply it to other areas of their lives as well. Beginner friendly. Okay, I'll give you about 1 more minute, everybody. Accessibility. This is so important. Many teachers are not quite aware of looking at tools for accessibility and making sure that they are designed to be used with any sort of tech tool that students have in their hands, whether that's a phone or a tablet or a desktop computer, right? So I want to ask you if you can share, be ready to participate in the chat. Any thoughts that come to mind when you see an image like this? I'll give you just a second to share any thoughts that come to mind, word association here with this image. Anything that comes to mind when you see this image. Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. Instructor lead, which we have to do that, right? At some points, we have to be up front in front of students, taking the lead. And give you just another second. Now, using technology in class. Now, I want you to notice and share in the chat any thoughts when you see this next image. Here we go. What differences do you notice? Exactly. There's collaboration. Everyone is engaged. Do we even know who is the teacher here? Which I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I learn more from my students about technology than they can possibly learn from me. I have web developers and engineers and people who know a lot of technology, and that's the beauty of teaching adult ed, isn't it? That we can learn from our students as well. So I don't think with the pace of technology evolving these days, there is any possible way for a teacher, an adult ed teacher, to be an expert in technology, but that's okay. We can learn along with our students. Instead of being the sage on the stage, right? We can be that guide on the side and model for them growth mindset and flexibility and digital resilience. So let's dive in about the Triple E framework. This was adopted by one of the 3 statewide leadership groups here in California that provide Professional Development for Adult Educators, OTAN, and we have adopted it for conducting our technology integration for teachers because we really believe in this framework. We previously explored other frameworks. Maybe you've heard of SAMR. If you could type yes or no in the chat if you ever heard of SAMR. We also, for a while, we're using TPAC. Could you type yes or no in the chat if you ever heard of TPAC? So yeah, those were great. Those are excellent frameworks. But what we found is that they focused on tech tools or the role of the teacher. Well, yes, those are very important. But we wanted to shift the focus on learners and helping them gain digital skills and on using technology to meet instructional goals through effective tech integration. So my colleague at OTAN, Susan Guerre, she introduced me to this framework and we got together right away working on brainstorming ways to apply this to adult ed. So just a little bit of background information about the Triple E framework. It was developed in 2011 by Professor Liz Kolb, a clinical psychologist at the University of Michigan. She found in her research and observations of K-12 teachers, who are some of the best, I have so much appreciation and respect for them, but she noticed that they were using EdTech tools as an afterthought, more of a fun distraction rather than to support students learning all the time. So this reminds me of about 4 years ago when my son was in middle school, this time of year exactly, just before the winter break, and he came home from school and he said, "Mom, today we did 10 Kahoots. It was fun." And I thought, oh, that's great. And putting myself in the mindset of a middle school teacher, I don't blame them. But I said, was this like to review some class content or what? What was the content? Like random. One was about sports and one was about holidays. And so that exemplifies what we shouldn't necessarily be doing. Our adults are busy individuals. We cannot waste their time. Okay. So while not specific to adult ed, this evidence-based framework, it has been tested and found to be both valid and reliable in studies in 2018, focuses on learning first with instructional goals and strategies to meet those goals, and the technology comes in secondary. Okay, so it applies a simple rubric, and you see these 3 E's in front of you. So let's go ahead and discuss what exactly each of these points under the 3 E's mean. Within engagement, you see the time on task, and this means that students are engaged by active learning techniques, not just passive use of technology. Co-use refers to joint media engagement, that second image that I showed you more, right? So in other words, students are participating in social learning. The tech integration isn't just busy work, but instead students are using tech to further their learning goals and get closer to attaining those objectives. And they're engaged in human connections, which with the rollout of all the artificial intelligence tools, this is an important thing to consider, right? So it's all about cooperative learning, what we already do very well in adult education. Last, learning objectives are at the forefront. Tech is not simply being used for drill and practice with software, for example, but students are engaged in using the technology to explore, create, solve problems. And that leads to greater motivation. And when students are greater motivated, then we know that they will persist, and that will lead to greater achievement as well. So this is really about cognitive engagement rather than behavioral engagement. Next is enhancement. Added value. That means that the EdTech tool is not just a replacement for a traditional tool that is working just fine. So maybe you've seen that before. A teacher is really trying to use a tool and it's just not filling the purpose, and they're sort of forcing that. We don't want to do that. Again, learning first, tools second. So the EdTech tool accomplishes something for students in their learning that could not be done with traditional methods or non-tech tools. The second under enhancement is the tech integration provides scaffolds and supports that lead to deeper learning. And the third part of enhancement is the tech allows for differentiation and personalization. So that means that students have the opportunity to self-assess, to reflect on their learning, and build their metacognition through that. Last, the final E there is extension. And you can imagine what that is. Anytime you do a lesson plan, you're thinking of how students are going to use in the classroom outside of the classroom, right? So applying to their lives, making the tech integration relevant. So with extension, tech use is not just reinforcement of content, but is integrated more deliberately with authentic experiences, contexts, and tasks in mind. And next, with the use of the tech, learning, of course, we know can occur 24/7 and not only within the confines of the classroom or during limited class time. Last, under an extension, the technology integration builds students' soft skills. If you aren't familiar with teaching skills that matter, I recommend that you have a look at how Octave is detailing what soft skills we should be using and helping our students gain in the classroom. So let's take a look at the rubric in just a moment. So no teacher is perfect with technology integration. Maybe close to, right? But things are evolving very rapidly. And if you're in the yellow, that's the beauty of this. You're just fine. You're doing your best, right? Not all of us had technology integration training as part of our teacher training, did we? So we want to get to the green, but when we're in the red, that's when there's a problem. So I want to have a little quick experience with this rubric. And Rachel, if you have it available, if you can put that into the chat, but we'll be going through really quickly the different questions for each of the three E's. So here is a case study that was done. QR codes for discussion and learning circles. As you can see, the learning goals or objectives for this lesson were that students would be able to participate in book club discussions with discussion questions about a novel, and they would be active in the conversation, and that they would draw evidence from the novel to support their discussion. So really great incorporating the college and career readiness standards, of course. And hey, it's free. Students had their cell phones in their pockets, so we didn't have to purchase anything, okay? So here's the activity. Students will have already read the text prior to the book club discussion. They're in groups of 3, 4, 5, whatever happens to work out the day of the activity. And they have a handful of QR codes in the middle of the table that were generated by the teacher. So one by one, each member of the group pulls out a QR code, scans it, and it links to a question about the novel. And then students comment on, answer the question, and use evidence from the text to support their answers. Okay, so I'm going to pause, let you look at that, thinking about engagement, enhancement, and extension. Now get ready to go to the chat, please. And what you're going to do, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. If you can answer yes, can you type a 2 in the chat? If you think somewhat, type a 1 in the chat. And if you conclusively determine that the answer is no, please type a 0 in the chat. Here we go. So that lesson on QR codes for group discussion on a novel. Engagement. Does the technology tool help students focus on the learning, the content with less distractions? Please type, again, you're going to type 2 if yes, 1 if somewhat, or 0 if no. Okay, we're seeing a lot of ones. 1.5, okay. Here's the next question, okay. Does the technology tool help to motivate students? to be active in the learning process. And I'm seeing some twos. One, twos, one. Okay. Last question for engagement. Will this technology use scanning QR codes cause a shift in the behavior where they're not just passive, but they're active social learners? Okay. So what you have clued into, I see a range of ones and twos, is that anytime students are using technology, they are engaged. They are. But with less distractions, that's questionable. That is questionable. Before, when we have done this training, we have heard from some teachers that say that, well, students don't even know how to scan a QR code. So if your learners are at that point, yes, for this, right? But I have students who are from China, and QR codes they have been around for years. Interestingly, little side, I have a student from China. Yesterday, she made a presentation about tips if we travel to China. And nowadays, homeless folks on the streets are not taking money in hand in China. They're holding up a QR code. So many of our students are familiar with that. If they're in the service industry during COVID, menus were QR codes and whatnot, right? So let's go on to enhancement. 1 or 0. Does that technology tool aid students in creating content to demonstrate their learning? Yeah, not so much. Okay. Next question. Does the technology create scaffolds to make it easier to understand concepts or ideas? Not a lot, right? I mean, it looks like the purpose is to learn how to use a QR code, not to support the learning that's about this book they read. And third, do students demonstrate understanding with this tool in a way they could not with traditional tools, such as questions on index cards? Great. Yes, we all agree with that. This activity could be easily done with strips of paper. Let's go to the last one. I have just a couple minutes left here. So extension. Does the technology create opportunities for students to learn outside of their typical day? And I love your comment there in the chat. Great stuff. So we're kind of in the middle here, right? So yeah, if they do not know how to use QR codes, this is going to be useful. But is this really connected to the learning? Not so sure about that. Yes, exactly. If they can access later and come back. Next question is, does the technology create a bridge between school learning and their everyday life experiences? Okay, so we're kind of all over the place there with that one. And last one, does the technology allow students to build skills that they can use in their everyday lives? All right. Well, thank you for participating. It looks like overall we were in the yellow. And again, it depends on the learners. It really does. What stage of digital skills they're at and so on. But what we found is that for engagement, yes, anytime students are using technology, they're engaged, but we need to make sure it's not just a distraction, right? For enhancement, we kind of decided not so much. This could be motivating, yeah, definitely, to scan a QR code, but what if one student doesn't have a phone? They will be left out. So the traditional tools might work just as well for this fishbowl activity. And then finally, what we feel is for extension, they're not really learning new skills unless they've never used a QR code before. But again, it all depends on where your learners are. So we need to start with the learners. So what kind of activities can you use for engaging, for enhancing instruction, for extending instruction with EdTech tools? What you can see on this QR code is a list of resources. So the Triple E framework instructional strategies are listed there. I don't know if you're familiar with Digital Promises Adult Learning Variability Navigator. They have excellent strategies compiled in one place. And at OTAN, we've created a Triple E cheat sheet that outlines and details different activities for engagement, enhancement, and extension. So I'll finish with this quote from Liz Kolb, the developer of the Triple E. She says that no lesson that integrates technology can be successful without the teacher carefully integrating instructional moves first. So thinking of instruction, goals first, technology to support, not technology first.